a coach for many. So I've been a coach for many years, and what's happened is that because people know that I trained in clinical psych, I have been referred some really challenging people, and I got to the stage of being referred someone who a very successful engineer who was doing really well in his career but and technically outstanding, but was starting to get to the point where his degree of perfectionism was starting to annoy his team, frustrate his boss. They'd had a major client saying they wanted to work with someone else, and he really decided to come and see me because his wife had told him one day that he was starting to inflict his perfectionism on the children. And he decided at that point he really needed to do something. So at that stage, I was mostly doing acceptance and commitment coaching, but I decided to do a deep dive and find something that I really felt was different. So I began on this journey about 10, 12 years ago in terms of schema, and it's been a very exciting journey so far. So just in terms of background, so a schema, obviously the word has a very general meaning, but in this context, it's really an early, organized, and persistent pattern of feeling and thinking that has a profound effect. And there are positive schemas, stable attachment, emotional fulfillment, and so on, as well as a whole lot of negative ones. So schema therapy started just looking at the negative side, but like a lot of other areas in psychology, it's embraced a more positive approach as well. So a little bit of history. This is the wonderful man, Dr. Jeffrey Young, American, who developed this approach in the early 2000s. His book came out in 2003, and he was actually a Gestalt therapist and who felt that Gestalt was incredibly powerful for people who had anxiety disorders and who had minor depressive problems. But he started to work with people who had personality disorders, and he quickly found that Gestalt was not really very effective. He trained very broadly, and he decided that if he could integrate elements of psychodynamic therapy, cognitive behavior therapy, etc., into an integrated approach, then he could come up with something that was much more powerful. And that's really what he did. And so how does this integrated approach work? Well, it works on several different levels. So what he came up with was a list of early maladaptive schemas that the coach and client work together so that the client can identify their own challenges. So this isn't diagnosis. This is working together to say, here are a whole lot of issues. Which do you think are most relevant to you? So in his analysis, there's maladaptive schemas, there's coping styles, how do you behave in relation to your schema, and modes, which we will talk about in a minute. So what are the origins of these schemas? So what we know is that in early childhood, we have a whole series of very, very well-known needs. And obviously the most obvious ones are for physical food and shelter and love and so on. But we have a whole lot of psychological needs in this kind of space. So for acceptance and praise, for protection, for predictability. And if we don't get these, we develop patterns that have a profound effect. And I just want to stop at this point and just tell you a little story about a client I saw yesterday, just to give you a feel for the origins of these things. So this is a woman who I've worked with for about 6 months, very bright, very able, runs a very successful marketing organization, and came to me because she was deeply frustrated that her organization wasn't really growing and developing in the way that she wanted. And when we looked at her situation, we found that she really had a number of people in her senior team who'd done fantastically well when the company was smaller, but now the company had grown, and three of them in particular were really out of their ability bubble. And we started with this fundamental idea that if she really wanted a first class company, she would have to be a first class CEO. And if she wanted to be a first class CEO, she'd have to have a first class team to support her. And we decided that that was the problem. So we worked on a whole lot of issues in terms of uh, identifying the skills she need, identifying the skills that these people have. You know the kind of work we do. But we got to the stage where she really felt like she had made a lot of progress, but was still very stuck, very, very stuck. And so we started talking about schema and these kind of ideas. And yesterday we had an extended session, and she told me a little bit about her life story. And we were focused in her telling the story on her main maladaptive schema, which is really pleasing others. So we were trying to work out where did this come from and why was it so powerful? So she told me a story, and it was an extraordinary story. Her mother was 15 when she was born, so she was adopted. She's since connected with her birth mother, and they get on really well. But she was adopted very early on, and she went to live in a foster family. Unfortunately, the foster family was very dysfunctional. They fought a lot. The parents split up. She went with the mother. The mother turned into a problem gambler to the point where the home environment was so unstable because of lack of money that she was taken over by her grandparents. And it was such an extraordinary story to hear, and I felt really deeply for her. And I said, "Well, how do you think that's impacted on you?" And there was a very long silence. And then she just burst into these absolutely heartfelt tears as she made the connection in her own mind between all of this huge disruption that happened to her in her childhood and her kind of conclusion from all of this disruption that the only way to survive in life was to get on with other people, to please other people. That's how she survived as a child. She was always the good child. So she was crying and apologizing for crying. So it was so interesting working with her. I felt it a real privilege to work with her yesterday as we started to explore the origins of the schema. So I hope that story gives you a bit of a flavor as to what we're talking about here. So this isn't finding blame. This is no one's fault. This is just a product of what happened to us. Our caregivers absolutely, in almost all cases, did the best they could, but that doesn't mean to say that our core childhood needs were met. And feel free to ask questions if you want. Um, So what this results in is a series of maladaptive or negative schemas. And just to give you a very brief flavor, in schema therapy, it's a very, very complicated system where they have, and if you can imagine a three-dimensional matrix, which I'm sure you can instantly draw to mind. So in this three-dimensional matrix, we've got 18 schemas, we've got 3 coping mechanisms, and we've got 11 mood states. So you can imagine the process of an 18 by 3 by 11 matrix. It's absolutely huge. And if you do some schema therapy training, you'll find they spend quite a lot of time arguing about whether it's A or B or B3 or da 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 da. So one of the things that I found using this in coaching was actually we don't see the full range of things in coaching. We don't see the full range of schemas. So I've identified 9 schemas that are the most typical, and I'm not going to run through them all, but unrelenting striving, we see lots of that in professional service firms. Every year we have to do better. Every year we have to push our team more. Every year more. And we are continually dissatisfied. We can't take our holidays. We mess up our family. sense of failure. Despite the fact that I'm now chief financial officer, I feel like the board's going to catch me out at any time. Needing approval, I've talked about. Self-sacrifice, we see this a great deal, particularly in health workers who run themselves ragged, and there's lots of other ones. So there are a series of these, and again, just to reiterate, this isn't diagnosis. Here's a series of things that many people find which are relevant to you. So this is a kind of a typical coaching mutual identification of challenges kind of problem. And over the last few years, people have become much more interested in positive schemas. And again, with my client yesterday, you could see that she had lots of positive schemas, success, healthy self-control, optimism were really her areas where she was doing extremely well. So positive and negative schemas. When Jeffrey Young developed schema therapy, so just going back for a moment, what he found when he started working with people who had personality disorders, so if you don't know what that means, essentially it means emotional regulation disorders. So these are people who rapidly move between emotional states and very often have a lot of problems because of that. What he found is that when he was working with people who had personality disorders, in the sessions, they would move rapidly between emotional states. So they might come with unrelenting standards and they might be talking about that. Then they might switch to being resentful at the demands that are placed on them. They then might be tearful because of the pressure that they felt and so on. So they kind of moved around this series of states. Now, what I've found in coaching, and just to say, schema coaching is in its early days, and I would really love to be proved wrong about some of my hypotheses. I'd really love someone to write an article in a few years saying, McCormick reckoned there were 9 schemas that were seen in coaching and the rest of them were, that's completely wrong, and here's the research. But anyway, what I've found is that actually you can simplify the very long list of mood states. And there are primarily only 3 that we see in coaching. So we see the healthy adult, and that's what we're trying to build up. We see the child modes, and it can be angry or whatever. And then there's some maladaptive ones, typically kind of punitive parent, inner critic, that kind of thing. So what I've tried to do in schema is to develop something that is really useful for the coaching environment. So to really help people get their core needs met in an adaptive manner through changing both their underlying schemas, so that's like their tray, and their coping styles, so that's really like their state, so state and trait, and to really build positive schema and to build the healthy adult. I've started running training courses in this, and one of the things that I found, which is both a delight and a slight horror, is people pick up on my enormous enthusiasm for schema coaching and want to apply it everywhere. If you've got a hammer, everything looks like a nail, that kind of problem. And so I've started to be much more careful about suggesting when people might use schema coaching. So I always suggest you start with a careful needs analysis. You proceed with something standard like solution focused or regrow. And if you can't make enough progress, then introduce the schema ideas, do a bit of psycho education, check that the person fits into the clinical population, the coaching population and not the clinical population. We can talk about how to do that, and then begin on the schema process. So schema isn't something that I would suggest you immediately jump into. It's a backstop for you. It's a fantastic resource if you find people have these deep-seated problems. But there's no point in getting into all of this if you can assist the person in 3 or 4 sessions with solution-focused coping. The other thing that I've done, as you can see, I'm really trying to simplify schema therapy and to take into schema coaching the things that are most relevant. And so I've come up with the schema octagon. For those of you who know ACT, you'll recognize this kind of model. Russ Harris, a very able man, came up with his hexagon for acceptance and commitment therapy. So this is really just a diagram that's relatively easy to remember. And at the heart of this is what's called limited reparenting. And just to give you a feel for that, so what we know about coaching and therapy and counseling is the quality of the relationship is the most critical factor in whether the client improves or not, how satisfied the client is. In schema coaching and schema therapy, we try to go more deeper and further into assisting the client by not only just forming a good relationship with them, but recognizing that what we're trying to do in this process is to help them overcome their deep-seated childhood neglect needs that are unmet. So it's this idea that Young came up with of limited reparenting is very powerful, because we're really trying to go a lot further than just having a good relationship. So the techniques in schema coaching are obviously case conceptualization, what's going on, can we agree upon this, teaching people about schema. There are a number of really useful techniques using mindfulness to let go of schema pain. Schema challenge is really using cognitive behavior therapy techniques. Emotional exposure is really using classical conditioning type exposure therapy to help clients face their challenges. Chair work and dialogue techniques come largely out of Gestalt. Imagery rescripting, very powerful technique we can talk about if you want. It basically comes out of psychodynamic therapy. And then relapse prevention, which really comes out of motivational interviewing. So you can see here what Young has done, and what I've really tried to do is to say, let's have an integrated approach by understanding what the schemas are, understanding what the challenges are the person has, and then being able to use any, or if you really want, all of these techniques with someone. So as a schema coach, you go into the situation with a very full toolkit of things that you can use. So that's really why it's different. And you can see it's a big topic, and we're not going to be able to cover everything today, but I hope that what I can do today is to give you an interesting kind of introduction. So the other thing, when I started publishing in the Coaching Psychologist, that's the British Psychological Society journal, about coaching, I got quite a lot of pushback, which was really helpful. People started saying to me, hey, you're unleashing this on the world, and there are lots of coaches who should never be doing this, etc., etc. And, you need to be clinically trained to do this. And I thought, schema is too good to be just restricted to a small group. But on the other hand, we do need to be very careful we are not stepping outside of our areas of competence. So I've come up with what I hope's useful, which I call the Ethical 8, which is just a series of things for you to think about if you want to use any technique, and specifically schema techniques. Just to quickly run through them, many of you will be able to tick these very easily. Are you formally trained in coaching? Have you had coaching yourself? And then more importantly, have you had some formal training in schema therapy or schema coaching? Have you undertaken some schema therapy or coaching yourself? And I strongly advise you, if you want to get into this area, to do some work on your own stuff, unless you're perfect, of course, and then you don't need to worry. But for mere mortals like me, I found it incredibly useful to do some schema therapy. You need to belong to an organization with ethics, which clearly you do. You need to scan for high functioning clients. You need to be careful that you don't uncover something in this schema work that you can't deal with. You need ongoing supervision and obviously reflective practice. So if you can tick those kinds of boxes, then I think you can embark upon schema coaching with some confidence. So these are the techniques that I recommend for non-clinically trained people. So case conceptualization, which is really understanding the problem, psychoeducation, which is really teaching people about schema. And in the last chapter of my book, which I'll talk about in a minute, there's actually a client guide. So it's the sort of thing you could copy off and send to your clients to give them a kind of an introduction to what this is all about. There's a lot of really good work being done in terms of mindful release, so using mindfulness techniques to reduce schema pain, and CBT techniques and I'm going to talk a little bit about schema challenge. So schema coaching and schema therapy have got their own kind of subset of cognitive behavior therapy, which works really well, I find. And the last technique is response prevention, which is really getting clients to look ahead. So if I look ahead in my calendar over the next month, what have I got coming up? What do I expect is going to be a big challenge? How can I start to prepare for that? So let's just dive into one of the techniques. As I say, we don't have time to dive into too many. There is an awful lot here, but let's have a look at the schema challenge process. So this is classic cognitive behavior therapy with a twist. So what you do, and there's a standard template for this, which I'm very happy to share with you. So you get the client to think about, well, what's a situation you want to work on? So the client might say, well, and if we take the example of the client that I was talking about earlier, she would come up with a situation of, well, I've got a finance manager who isn't really performing. She does the finances, but she won't get into being able to provide financial insights for the business and help us to really manage our business on a financial level. She's just like a bookkeeper. When I deal with her, when I talk to her about the situation and what I'm expecting, she's always coming up with, well, I've got this problem and I'm short of staff and there's this and we've got the software out, And what happens with this client is that they immediately start, because they have got a please others schema, they immediately start seeing everything from the person's point of view, and their own ability to assert what the company needs evaporates. So it's a very big problem. So what do they feel? They feel frustration. What's the trigger? The trigger is trying to have a courageous conversation. What is my schema? So my schema is please others, which means that if in doubt, I have to work very hard so everybody will like me. How does this distort my thinking? Well, what happens is instead of bearing in mind what the company needs and moving forward on this, I give them the benefit of the doubt and I let them make excuses, and we finish the meeting with them basically not committing to anything. So the reality is that I am not being a good CEO because this schema is causing me to want to give in. So what am I going to do? So the next meeting I have, even though I want to give in to my financial manager and say, yes, I know how tough life is, I'm not going to behave that way. I'm going to stick to, yes, I understand, but this is what the company needs. I need some strategic insight, and therefore my homework is. And the thing that is fantastic that I really like about this process is, and I have to, a small time for confession here, I think I'm a really rotten cognitive behavior therapist. And I really can't get my head around the idea, and I know this is a slightly cynical view, but anyway, I really can't get my head around the idea that what we need to do is to convince other people that their thinking is dysfunctional and therefore they can behave differently it just seems to me it's a kind of a hard place to start building rapport if you're trying to convince someone that their thinking is dysfunctional. So I really like this because we're not trying to do this the person has already agreed that they have this schema, and they've already talked about how it distorts their thinking and how it impacts their behavior. So now we've got a process to work through this. So we'd work through this in a session, and then the homework would be for the person to work through this uh, in a number of ways. As you can see, Schema's got a whole lot of other techniques. Just to give you a little bit of a flavor of the other techniques. So imagery rescripting is a process whereby you ask people to identify an early childhood memory and talk through the story. You then ask them to go through the story in the first person present. So they might say, well, I was 5 and I remember being woken up by my brother who came in early in the morning, crept into my room and then held me down with my pillow over my face, or whatever the story is. And then you say, can I come and talk to your brother? And can I come and talk to you? So they're in this process of having created this very powerful memory. And you might say to the bully, hey, back off, and you might move the bully away in the imagination. So you might address the client's needs by removing the bully from the situation. And then you might talk to the client and say, hey, Billy, you're a great kid. Look, you did your best. No one could expect you to be calm and reasonable under these circumstances. I know you screamed and yelled, but that's an entirely, so that gives you a kind of a flavor. So what we're doing is where you can't remove early childhood memories, but you can reframe them. You can create new neural pathways that interfere with the old pathways. Now you can see that this is a very powerful technique. You need to be well trained in this. You need to go through some therapy yourself you need to do it yourself. So chair work, it comes out of Gestalt. And the thing why I recommend this for people primarily who are clinically trained is in Gestalt and some of the chair work, you can get into some really powerful states that you can't necessarily easily control. And the same a little bit for emotional exposure, where you're really trying to get clients to face situations that they would normally avoid. I'm not saying that if you're not clinically trained, you can't ever use these. What I am saying is if you want to use these, you need to, one, be trained. You need some therapy yourself in this. You need to find someone so you can go through it. You need good supervision, etc. So it's just a process of being a bit more careful. We're dealing with some techniques that are very powerful. So this is the book that I've written. It's available from Routledge. It's part of a series called Coaching Psychology, as you can see. And the editor is Stephen, the very well-known UK coaching psychologist, Stephen Palmer, who's very kindly written me a foreword. And what I've really tried to do in the book is to make it a really practical, coaching-focused approach to skill building and being able to enable you to feel confident and try out some of these things in a balanced and careful kind of way. And so I've had a lot of interest in this, as you can probably imagine. So I'm starting up a 75-hour training program. So it's 12 months meeting once a month with reading, with coaching using the techniques. We will do some live coaching online, etc., etc. For anybody that's interested, you can contact me either on probably LinkedIn is probably the easiest. But if you want to take a snapshot of that, it's ian.mccormick@icloud.com. And what I'd now like you to do is to just turn back to those clients. When we started, you wrote down some initials of clients. You've now heard about the range of things that schema coaching can offer. And just to have a think about Okay, well, am I using some of these already? Because I'm not saying that a lot of this is brand new. It's none of it is new. All of it, what is new is the integrated approach. So maybe you're already using some CBT or whatever. So which of the schema coaching techniques is most relevant? What is it that you would like to do moving forward? So, I'll just give you a few minutes to reflect on that and think about it, and then we can have some discussion. I hope you've got some questions. I hope you've got some challenge for me because I would love that. So, anybody got a reflection on a deep-seated challenge that a client has got where this might be relevant, or are there any other issues or points people would like to raise, or things that they would like to bring up at this point? If
I
you
have a question, if that's
wonderful, thank you. Whoa, we're started. What a relief.
great, great. So is it, thanks very much. That was really interesting. And I've had CBT therapy, I've had schema therapy and coaching, and I'm a coach myself, but I'm not a qualified therapist. just to let you know.
Yep,
But
fantastic.
but so sometimes when I've had therapy, I thought sometimes, well, it would be great to have some coaching because I've got through a lot of issues here. And then I thought, the therapist wasn't really ready to able to do that. So
Yes.
bringing these two together sounds fantastic.
Wonderful.
Um,
Thank you. Yes, that's
is
exactly the kind of issue I'm trying to deal with here. I'll be interested in, if you get into it, I'll be interested whether you think I've succeeded or not.
oh, great. Well, just like one question: is it are we looking more for sort of changing behavior and mindsets rather than emotional healing, or is it a bit of both, or how do you deal with sort of the goal and the focus in those terms?
Yes, so I think that's a really interesting question because I think the first thing is we obviously deal with whatever the client brings, the presenting issue. So we very often set up our goals and coaching in relation to that. So if we think about that client that I talked about, she wants to build a great company. That's really the goal of our coaching in the long term. But of course, the sub goals are really around her behavior, and we really can't get her to have these, enable her to have these courageous conversations unless she does something about this desire to constantly see the other person's perspective and to please them and not upset them. So I think that the overall goal relates to what the client initially presents or that we get to the bottom of, which the client wants. But the sub goals are really around behavior and thinking and emotion and so on. I hope that clarifies it a bit, does it, Mark?
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yes, yes, that's great. Thank you.
Tony,
Hi. Hi.
hi.
Yeah, hi. Yes, yeah, I'm working with a client who works in a top company in London, and
Yes,
she has a very good job. But in conversations I have with her, this pattern comes up of where she feels constantly victimized, or people don't like her, or she doesn't know how to connect with people, or
right.
that the boss is not on her side and the team
Yes,
don't support her. And then when I talk about her past, that boss did the same thing.
right.
So, but you can feel she feels a huge amount of pain around all
Yes,
of this.
yes,
Hugely painful for her, but there is this pattern of feeling that she doesn't know how to connect with people and they're persecuting her, even though she
yes,
does a fantastic job and she's in a high-powered job.
yes,
So, it's trying to get with all that very deep felt emotion, what is the survival mechanism? What's at play there in the childhood?
yes,
Yeah.
yes, yes. Yes, exactly. That's a fantastic example. And that's what we see constantly. These really successful people who have this kind of critical flaw that's really starting to hold them back. So what I'd say is two things, and obviously you've started in the right place. So you've started to explore her childhood and where this came from and so on. And sometimes insight is enough. I've had clients where that's all we've needed to do. We just have a 2-3 hour session. I'm a great fan of longer sessions if you're doing something like this. And just ask them, tell me your life story. Tell me about your ancestors. Where did you come from? What were your grandparents like? Tell me about what was primary. Just walk through, and then at the end of it, saying, what are the patterns that you see here? What's going on here that is affecting you? And for some people, that is enough. If you want to start with something, there's a chapter in the book on using mindfulness techniques to let go of schema pain. So this kind of paranoia and this kind of doubt that she's got, you can use mindfulness techniques to help the person to see those, to watch the flow of emotion, the kind of the wave of emotion, and to enable them to recognize that this is something that they don't need to be scared of. They can watch it come, they can watch it build, and then they can watch it go. And so for many coaches, I recommend starting with using, if I assume you are familiar with mindfulness. Yeah, okay. So that's
Yes.
why it's kind of a good place to start. Now, of course, there's quite good research that mindfulness isn't for everybody. For some people, it can induce anxiety, can introduce, painful thoughts, etc. So you need to be careful. It's not a universal as it's prophesied to be. But that's a good place to start. And there is a really interesting book, if you want to drill into it a bit more, called Mindfulness and Schema Therapy by a Dutch writer who has a name that I can't pronounce. But it's worth looking at. It's quite different in the sense that the book is really about the use of group mindfulness techniques with people, with schemas. And what they do is they have quite big groups, but they focus on one or two people. So it's a kind of it's a little bit like, the mindfulness-based stress reduction, how that's a kind of a structured process. This is a little bit like that. So it's not directly relevant to coaches, but it's a really interesting read. And that's where, standing on the shoulders of giants, I really got a lot of those ideas, and that's where the source of the chapter is, which is, of course, duly acknowledged in the book. But I hope that's a useful place to start.
Thank you, Iain. Thank you.
Anyone else?
Yes, hello, Iain.
Hello.
Hello, it's Roxani from Greece. Thank you
Hello.
thank you for the great presentation.
Thank you very much. Thank you for being here. Delighted.
Thank you so much. I have a coach of mine that she's a lawyer. She's got same as Tony, this victimized mentality from
Yes.
childhood, from a very strong paternal pattern that she was, and she's got victimized and also perfectionist at the same time.
Yes.
And
Yes.
she's alone. Also, she cannot make friends. So this is a very
Yes.
difficult, even if she's good at the lawyer, but because of the victim, she thinks that everybody is accusing or has something they have to say. I told
Yes.
her that one solution is to be more sociable. But there is this
Yes.
difficulty of her to trust people, or I don't know, she doesn't want to be open.
Good. এদিকে সালে এদিকে আফরিন this way. This is very good. That is not good. This one. Let's explore. Come.
Mr. Alim, we can hear you. Can you close? Yes. And so I don't know how I can make her to believe that she has to be sociable, to come close to the people. I think this will help her to be more open.
Yes, 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 yes. So again, I think that, and you've probably done quite a lot of this already, but I think going back and just trying to identify what the sources of this are. Actually, just before I go there, let me just take a slightly different turn. One of the things that I've raised is that we as coaches are not clinical psychologists. Well, a few of us might be, but we are not practicing clinical psychologists. We are coaches. So we need to make sure that we are working with the coaching population. So what does that mean? And it's something that I intend to do a bit of, as one of my goals for this year, to do a bit of research on, because everybody talks about it, but what on earth does it mean? But anyway, in the book that I've tried to come up with, scratch together a definition of what we're talking about. And I raise this issue because if she has this kind of paranoia and so on, she might not be in the coaching population, and you might need to think about referring her on. However, let's talk about what I think the coaching population means. So I think it means three things. I think it means people, first of all, people with a reasonable degree of psychological stability. So when she's telling the story, you need to be aware and think about, am I hearing anything about a major psychiatric illness? Am I hearing anything that would characterize this person as having a personality disorder? Am I hearing anything about a serious addictive problem? Am I hearing anything about chronic depression here? Am I hearing, et cetera, et cetera? So through that process, we need to be doing this assessment of, is this someone we should really be working with? And if it isn't, my strong belief is that every coach should have a personal relationship with a clinical psychologist who they know, who they've at least had a cup of coffee with, who they can refer on. So you can put your hand on your heart and you can say, look, I'm a coach. I don't deal with this issue. I know Bill, Mary, whatever it is, they're fantastic. I suggest you make an appointment to see them. So that's the first thing in this case. We really need to make sure we're working with the right kind of person. So let me just ask that question. Let me carry on. So the first thing is, people in the coaching population have a reasonable degree of emotional stability. They have a reasonable degree of social stability. So they tend to be able to maintain relationships. They might have had 2 or 3 marriages, but at least they have got married, and or they might have had serious relationships. We doesn't need to be marriage, of course, but can they sustain relationships? And thirdly, have they got a reasonable degree of vocational stability? And if you can look at the person and you can tick all of those boxes, then probably, in my view, and until some more better research is done, you've just got my prejudice. If you can tick those 3 boxes, then they probably are in the coaching population. So I think that's the first place to start, because what you've described has some elements of quite serious clinical difficulties.
I totally agree with you.
Yeah, so she might not be someone you should be working with.
Yes.
That's the first thing to, and of course, I'm not in a position to tell you one or the other, your decision. And of course, talking it all over with your supervisor is obviously the very, very best thing you can do. So once you've made that decision, then again, as before, I think if you're familiar with mindfulness, then that's a good place to start. If like Mark, you have done some cognitive behavior therapy yourself, or you feel comfortable, done some training, then I would look at Schema flashcards. Oh, sorry, what Jeffrey Young called Schema flashcards. I need to be careful about my technology, which I call Schema challenge cards, which seem to me a much more sensible thing to call them. You could start trying to work on that with her. But yeah, there are a few quite significant danger signals in there, and I'm just delighted that you can see that yourself, because that's so important for both the client and obviously for the coach. I hope that's a useful place to think.
Yes, thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you. Someone else?
Hi, I kind of have like a question, just follow from Tony. about her client there.
Yes.
And I think one of your slides were talking about high function. Yeah.
Yes.
Do you mean neurodivergent autism high function? Do you mean, what do you mean?
No. Sorry, yes. That's a really, really good question, and I'd never thought about that, but I must be more careful using that term. So if you look at a definition of coaching, one of the very early definitions was from, the godfather of coaching, Tony Grant from Sydney. And one of the things that he said, his definition of coaching, is that coaching really takes positive psychology and marries it with brief solution-focused therapy to use with high-functioning clients. And by high-functioning, he meant, I think, because he's dead now, regrettably, but I think he meant people who have a reasonable degree of psychological, social, and vocational stability. So we're not talking about neurodiversity. We're talking about people who are largely able to hold down senior jobs and to function at a reasonable level in those jobs.
Okay. But have you considered maybe, or have you have an experience with working with executives that have presented with high functional autism, high functional neurodiversity, and do by the presentation of their that's actually relationships and forming relationships and bluntness, feedback, and having this very sometimes come across as harsh and type of communication styles. Have you come across as how to, marrying these difficulties that it is proper from the neurodivergent client?
Yes,
that
yes.
might be very successful. They are
Yes.
very successful, but however, their personal skills and relationship skills are really part of the deficiencies that, or maybe people talking about difficulties within neurodivergent.
Yes, yes, yes. So absolutely, you're absolutely spot on. I would say that a good number of the CEOs that I have are on the spectrum. Certainly a very large number of are hyperactive in one form or another. And many of them have a degree of social disconnection, sometimes which is useful and sometimes which isn't. The way in which so again, I think with those sort of people, I would never jump into schema as step one. With those kinds of people, the thing that I've learned from doing training in this area is that the skills of cross-cultural communication are really useful to use with neurodiverse clients. In other words, you really need to be careful about assumptions you make, what words mean, what you think normal is, whether you interpret bluntness as rudeness or just, efficiency, etc., etc. So I would start with those people in terms of what is it they want to achieve. And very often that is, they do want high performance, but they also want their people to stay. So you can get them to be talking about, well, okay, so on a scale to 10, how well do you think you do in terms of getting high performance? Well, I'd rate myself 9. I really get things done. In terms of being able to establish long-term relationships with people, how well do you do? And they might say, well, I'd give myself 5 because I don't tolerate fools, something like that. That'd be the kind of thing that you would expect to hear from those people. And then you can start working on a series, which has got nothing to do with schema, a series of kind of empathy building exercises. So, okay, let's take this head of development in your business. Let's talk about them. Let's identify what their motivation is. What sort of, are they a people person? Are they an achievement person? Etc., etc. What sort of, and then how could we appeal to that sort of person to get what we want? So that's the place I would start with neurodiverse type of clients. And I recognize in saying this, I'm not recognizing the diversity of neurodiversity, but and I'm kind of lumping it into just one tiny subset. But anyway, in terms of those kind of folks, that's what I've done. That's been very useful.
Thank you so much.
But it's not a schema issue. Anybody else? We're running out of time, but we've probably got time for one, maybe two. Yes. Mark again, was it? No. Oh, you're muted, Mark. Mark, can you unmute if you want to say something?
Oh yeah, sorry. Yes, I did have a question if no one else does, if that's okay. Do you use some assessments like you mentioned conceptualization? Are they useful? I can imagine they kind of will be with coaching clients because they want to, you know, see progress and see tables and things like that. Like, yeah.
Yes.
So I just wondered how you use it.
So the short answer is yes, and let me just give you a little bit of background. So Jeffrey Young has got a whole series of Young schema inventories, and I have used those, and my own schema therapist used those when I went to see him, and so I've done them both as a, used them as a coach as well as. But the problem with most of them, with most of Young's assessments, is that they don't. So if we take, so I've got a bit of the subjugation schema. So I'm kind of one of those people who, if the emotional temperature rises up, I just give up. You know, I'm kind of one of those kind of folks. It's one of my many failings. And when you look at the items in the Young in the Young schema inventory for that sort of problem, it says, I always give in to other people. I'm still very involved with my parents. I'm dominated by, Now, many of those things are not relevant to me because I'm in the coaching population. So I do a lot of things really well, and I've got a few things that I really stuff up on and am deeply dysfunctional on. And I think that, so what I've done, I've developed and it's not a psychometric test by any means. It's a little questionnaire, and I've had some really useful feedback from Antonia. So I can see you here, Antonia. I'm delighted you're here, and thank you for your feedback. And if you email me, I'll send you a copy of it. But it's a simple one-pager that just goes over the 9 most commonly seen schemas in coaching, and just asks the person to rate how much is this like me. And as I say, it's not a psychometric test. It's been through no item analysis, etc., etc. There's no validity. It's just a discussion tool. But that's what I use, and I find that really helpful because, again, it gets us away from the I'm the expert, I'm making the diagnosis, to here's something for us to talk about. What do you identify with? And all of the items on the inventory that I've got start with, despite all my success in life, I still ... Okay, so despite all the success in life, I still feel a failure, or I still want to do more and more every day, or etc., etc. So you can see I've reworded everything to try and make it much more relevant to the coaching population. And if anybody is interested in using it, please do send me an email and I'll send you a copy. What I would love to do is to have the anonymized data sent back to me at some point, because what I'm starting is a little research project on what are the most common schema. Now, whether I'll ever get it published or not because of the fundamentally flawed basis of the data collection, I don't know, but it might just get into a section like for the International Journal of Evidence-Based Coaching and Mentoring. They've got a section that I write for, which is called Reflections from the Field. And those of us who are methodologically flawed and deeply inadequate can get published in that, even though our sample size is inadequate, and et cetera, et cetera. So that might be the sort of thing that I could try and get this. But please do write to me. I'm very happy to share it, and I would love to have the data. Thank you. It's a wonderful,
Thank you.
wonderful question. I'm just delighted you brought it up.
Oh, thanks so much for the answer. Yeah, it's a great answer. Thank you.
I love that wording there, Ian, despite my success. And I think it really helps us to distinguish between therapy and coaching as well.
Yes, yes. I think that's absolutely right, because we tend to see in therapy those people who really aren't coping in one form or another. In coaching, that we do sometimes see that, but most of our people are actually doing really well. They're holding down jobs, they're in stable relationships, etc., etc. But they're often, I don't really like the phrase, but it is descriptive. They're often brilliant but flawed.
Well, Ian, there's been so many fabulous comments on the depth of the session, deep value, insight, wonderful. And I wish we had you for a full morning or afternoon, because there's so much to cover on every single slide there. Thank you so much. We appreciate your time. I imagine you're going to get loads of emails. I've put your email in the chat, the link to your books in the chat as well.
Wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you everyone for turning up.
And thank you very much indeed for all of your interest and for those absolutely wonderful questions. I probably couldn't have thought of better questions to ask. So thank you very much indeed.
And I'm wondering if maybe a demonstration later in the year, maybe
sure.
On the cards.
We could. It would be very easy if someone is willing and we can establish decent psychological safety and get agreement, where we might need some written agreement beforehand if we're going to do something live. But if we can get a written agreement about safety and confidentiality, then I'd be very happy to do a live session, particularly, I think, do a schema conceptualization.
Yeah, and no recording. Yeah.
And no recording, and obviously with a guarantee that if the person brings anything up, then I will see them afterwards free of charge for as long as it takes to resolve it. So we definitely need to create an environment where if you're willing to come on and share some of your own personal ideas and your own feelings, then you will be looked after.
Well, I'm sure there's a lot of people here. There's nods I can see. Let's make that happen. Wonderful. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much indeed, Claire.
Have a great day or evening, everyone. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.